For 17 years I worked in the darkness, and when I saw the Epstein files drop last month, over 3 million pages of documents released by the Department of Justice, I recognized everything. Not because I was part of anything like that, but because I know how the kingdom of darkness operates. I know the patterns, I know what a soul-harvesting operation looks like. And I can tell you right now, what the media is showing you is only the surface. They are showing you the crimes, the names, the documents, the connections to powerful people, presidents, princes, billionaires. But nobody is showing you what was really happening in the spiritual realm. And that is what I am going to expose today. My name is Carson. I grew up in a small town, farming country, maybe 6,000 people. The kind of place where everybody goes to church on Sunday and locks their doors at night thinking that is enough. My home was a war zone. My dad was a drunk. My mum took off when I was 9. I bounced around from uncle to cousin to whoever would take me for a few months. I remember sleeping in a shed behind my uncle's house one winter because there was no room inside. 14 years old, curled up on a pile of moving blankets, and I was thinking, nobody on this planet cares whether I live or die. That is when a guy down the road, older guy, maybe late 30s, started paying attention to me. His name was Dale. He had a nice truck, always had cash, people respected him. He fed me, he taught me things, he gave me a sense of belonging for the first time in my life. And he was part of an organization, not some Hollywood thing with robes and candles. This was organized, quiet, disciplined. And they saw something in me. They saw a kid who understood broken homes, a kid who knew what it felt like when a house had no covering, no protection, no peace. And they used that. For 17 years I worked assignments against Christians. My specialty was the home, the bedroom specifically. I knew how to get in. I knew what gave us access. I knew which objects, which habits, which gaps in a believer's spiritual life opened the door for us to walk right in and set up shop. I placed financial curses on families. I sent spirits to destroy marriages. I blocked prayers that were meant to reach heaven. I kept records. I documented everything. Over 300 Christians that I personally targeted across those 17 years. Success rate? 81%. That means out of every 10 Christian homes I targeted, about 8 of them fell. And the families inside had no clue. They just thought they had bad luck. They thought their marriage was falling apart on its own. They were wrong. But here is what haunts me even now, 13 years after I gave my life to Christ. I knew about larger operations that were above my level, operations that were not about blocking prayers or destroying marriages, operations designed to harvest something far more valuable than a Christian's peace of mind. Innocence, purity, the untouched soul. I never participated in those operations. I was not high enough in the hierarchy. They kept people like me away from that level. But I knew they existed. I heard whispers. I saw things I was not supposed to see. And I understood that what I was doing, as evil as it was just the surface level. And when I saw what was revealed about networks like Epstein's, when I read the testimonies of survivors, when I understood the scope of what had been happening for decades while the world looked the other way, I recognized it immediately. This was not just crime. This was not just evil men doing evil things. This was a coordinated spiritual operation, a harvesting operation, and the patterns were identical to what I knew from my years in the darkness. Today I am going to tell you exactly how these operations work from a spiritual perspective, not the crimes themselves. The media covers that endlessly. I am going to show you the invisible side, why certain people are targeted, how the enemy selects his targets, how he recruits them, how he controls them, how he consumes them, and most importantly, I am going to show you why some survivors are absolutely impossible to destroy, no matter what the darkness throws at them, because that is the part nobody is talking about, the part that terrified me when I was still serving the enemy. Some people carry a mark that hell cannot touch. This is for you, especially if you or someone you love has survived something that should have destroyed them. Let us get into it. The first thing you need to understand is what I call a soul harvesting operation. In the kingdom of darkness, there is a hierarchy of value. Not everything is equal. Not every operation carries the same weight. There are levels to this, and the higher you go, the darker it gets. At the bottom level, you have simple attacks. Blocking prayers, creating division in families, financial pressure making Christians doubt their faith. That was my level for most of those 17 years. That was what I did. I was good at it. But I was never invited higher. Above that, there are more targeted operations. Destroying specific ministries, taking down pastors, infiltrating churches. This is where the real strategy happens, where assignments are planned months or years in advance. But above all of that, at the very top there are operations designed to capture something the enemy values above everything else: innocence, purity, the untouched soul. Now, I need to be very careful here. I am not going to describe crimes. I am not going to give details that would hurt survivors or violate anyone. What I am going to do is explain the spiritual mechanics that the media will never tell you about. When I was active, maybe in my 5th or 6th year, my handler took me aside after a meeting. His name was Dale, the same man who had recruited me when I was 14. He had risen in the organization over the years, and now he oversaw people like me. He had this calm about him that used to unsettle me, like nothing could touch him, like he had seen everything and none of it bothered him anymore. He said, "Carson, what we do is important. Never forget that. We serve a purpose, but I want you to understand something." I asked him what. He looked around to make sure no one was listening. Then he leaned in close and said, "There are brothers in other cities doing work that feeds the kingdom directly. You and me, we just block Christians. We disrupt. We delay. But they harvest for the throne." I did not fully understand what he meant at the time. I asked him to explain, but he just shook his head. "You are not ready to know," he said. "Maybe one day, but not yet." I never got promoted high enough to learn the details, but I heard things over the years, whispers, references, enough to piece together a picture that I did not want to see. And I did not truly understand it until years after I surrendered my life to Christ. When I started studying Scripture, when I started understanding how the enemy really operates. See, in the spirit realm, innocence has a specific frequency. That is the only way I can describe it. It is like a signal, a beacon. The younger the soul, the purer the frequency. The less corruption, the less trauma, the less sin has touched them, the brighter they shine in the spiritual realm. And the enemy, he hunts that brightness. He wants to corrupt it, to twist it, to claim it, before God can use it for his purposes. I know this sounds dark. It is dark, but you need to understand it because this is the reality of spiritual warfare. This is what we are actually fighting against. Not just personal attacks, not just financial struggles. There is a war for souls happening all around us, and the youngest and most vulnerable are the primary targets. When I look at what has been revealed about elite networks, when I read the documents and the survivor testimonies and the investigative reports, I see all the markers of a coordinated spiritual operation. Not just crime, not just evil men satisfying evil desires. A systematic effort to identify, isolate, and harvest vulnerable souls on a massive scale. Let me break down the patterns I recognize. There are 6 of them, and each one matches exactly what I learned during my 17 years in the darkness. The first pattern is targeting. When I worked assignments against Christians, I did not pick targets randomly. That would have been a waste of time and resources. I was trained to look for specific vulnerabilities, specific markers that indicated someone would be easier to attack, people who were isolated from community. That was the first marker. A Christian without a church family is like a soldier without a unit, exposed, unprotected, easy prey, people who were already wounded. That was the second marker, someone going through a divorce, someone who just lost a parent, someone whose business was struggling. Existing wounds made new attacks easier because their defenses were already down. People without spiritual covering. That was the third marker. This one is important. In the spirit realm, covering matters. A wife under a praying husband has protection. Children under praying parents have protection. A church member under godly leadership has protection. But remove that covering, and you remove the protection. I would spend weeks studying a potential target before I ever sent an assignment. I would learn their patterns, their relationships, their vulnerabilities. I would identify exactly where they were weakest, and that is where I would attack. The documents from the Epstein case reveal the exact same pattern, but on a massive scale. They targeted the young, some as young as 13 or 14 years old, not randomly, not accidentally, specifically. They looked for those from broken homes, homes where fathers were absent or abusive, homes where mothers were struggling to survive, homes where nobody was watching, where nobody would notice if a young person disappeared for a few hours. They targeted those who had already experienced harm. This one made me sick when I read it, because I recognized it immediately. One survivor I read about, before she ever encountered these predators, she had already been hurt by her own father. Another survivor had already experienced harm from a previous predator. They were already wounded, already broken, already vulnerable. They targeted those desperate for money, young people from poor backgrounds, those willing to do almost anything for $200 because $200 meant food on the table, or rent paid, or clothes that were not falling apart. They targeted those desperate for opportunity, young people who wanted to be models or actors or artists, those who would believe a promise of career advancement, those who would trust someone who seemed to offer a path out of their circumstances. Over 250 survivors identified by the Department of Justice, and when you look at their backgrounds, the pattern is undeniable: vulnerable, wounded, isolated, desperate. You see what I'm saying? These were not random targets. These were souls that had already been marked, already weakened, already stripped of protection. In the spirit realm, we called that an open door, a person whose spiritual defenses had already been compromised by previous trauma. They were easier to access, easier to influence, easier to destroy. When I was active, I would look for Christians going through divorce because their covering was being torn apart. I would look for Christians who had stopped attending church because they had removed themselves from community protection. I would look for Christians isolated from family because family provides spiritual defense. Those were my targets, because isolation and wounding remove covering. What I see in these elite operations is the same principle applied to the most vulnerable population imaginable: the young, the wounded, the forgotten ones that society has already failed. And that should break your heart, but it should also open your eyes to how the enemy operates. He is not creative. He uses the same patterns over and over because they work. Identify the vulnerable, target the wounded, attack those without protection. If you understand this pattern, you can recognize it. And if you can recognize it, you can protect yourself and your family from it. Now, before I get to the next pattern, I need to tell you about something. That is why I want to tell you about something called Destroying Assignments, the 14-day deliverance protocol. It is a complete system that teaches believers how to identify and destroy the most common demonic assignments. This protocol covers every type of assignment we used during my 17 years in the darkness. Financial attacks that drain your resources, marriage attacks that create division where there should be unity, health attacks that steal your strength, and destiny attacks that keep you from walking in your purpose. This protocol was developed by believers who understand spiritual warfare at a deep level. And I myself went through this protocol after my deliverance. It was part of my healing process, learning how to recognize and break every assignment that I had helped to place on people, learning how to seal my own freedom so the enemy could not reclaim what God had freed. The link is in the description. Do not wait another day. The enemy does not wait. While you are considering whether to take action, he is already planning his next attack. All right, let me tell you about the second pattern. The second pattern is recruitment through need. When I look at how these networks operated, I see a principle I know very well. Find the need, promise to fill it, create dependence. This is how the enemy has operated since the Garden of Eden. He finds what you want, what you need, what you are desperate for, and he offers it to you. The fruit looked good. It promised wisdom. It seemed like exactly what Eve was missing, and she took it. The enemy does not change his tactics because he does not need to. They work. When I was targeting Christians, the first thing I would do is study their needs. What were they lacking? What were they praying for? What kept them up at night? I remember a man I targeted in my 8th year. I will call him Daniel. He was a deacon at a small church, faithful husband, good father. But he had a need. His construction business was struggling. He had borrowed money to expand at the wrong time, and now he was drowning in debt. I sent an assignment designed to offer a counterfeit solution. Within 3 weeks, a man showed up at his job site, said he represented investors who were looking for construction partners, offered Daniel a contract that would solve all his financial problems. The contract was real. The money was real. But the people behind it were connected to operations I was part of. And slowly, over the course of a year, they compromised Daniel, got him cutting corners, got him signing off on things he should not have signed off on. Got him lying to inspectors, got him so deep that he could not get out. By the time I was done with Daniel, he had lost his business, his reputation, his position at church, and nearly lost his family. All because I found his need and offered to fill it. The survivors I have read about in these elite networks, they were offered money. $200 at first. For what they were told would be a simple task, a massage. Nothing more than that. Just a massage. $200 might not sound like much to some people, but if you are 15 years old and your mother cannot pay the electric bill, $200 is everything. If you have not eaten a real meal in 3 days, $200 is salvation. If you have nothing and someone offers you something, you take it. They were offered education. Some survivors had their college tuition paid. Universities like NYU, Columbia, places they could never have afforded. Places that represented a future they had never dared to dream about. Can you imagine? You are a young person from a broken home, struggling to survive, and suddenly someone is offering to pay for your education, to send you to a school that costs more per year than your family makes in 3 years. Of course you would be grateful. Of course you would feel obligated. Of course you would do whatever they asked. They were offered careers, modeling opportunities, connections to powerful people, introductions to the elite. For young people who had nothing, who came from nothing, who saw no path forward, these offers felt like winning the lottery. And here is what the enemy understands that most people do not. When you are desperate, when you are hungry, when you have nothing, an offer of help feels like salvation. It feels like God answering your prayers. It feels like finally someone sees you, someone cares about you, someone is going to rescue you. I used a similar principle in my work against Christians. I would study a target, find their greatest need. Then I would send an assignment designed to offer a counterfeit solution that would ultimately destroy them. A business opportunity that would compromise their integrity. A relationship that would pull them away from church. A financial windfall that came with spiritual strings attached. The enemy does not usually show up looking like evil. He shows up looking like opportunity, looking like rescue, looking like the answer to your prayers. One survivor I read about said she thought she was being helped. She thought this powerful man saw something special in her. That out of all the people in the world, he had chosen to invest in her. She thought he was going to change her life, and in a way, he did. He destroyed it. Another survivor said she felt chosen, special. She said the attention and the gifts and the opportunities made her feel like she mattered for the first time in her life. That is the deception of the enemy. He offers you what you need with one hand, while he takes your soul with the other. He makes you feel valued while he is actually consuming you. He makes you feel rescued while he is actually capturing you. If you are in a desperate situation right now, if you are facing a need that feels overwhelming, I need you to hear me. Be very careful who offers you help. Be very careful what doors you open. The enemy knows your need, and he will use it. Not every opportunity is from God. Not every open door should be walked through. Sometimes the enemy opens doors specifically to trap you. Now, if this is hitting home for you, if you have ever accepted help that ended up harming you, if you have ever walked through a door that you now realize was a trap, I want you to participate in something powerful right now. In the comments, write out this declaration. I break every covenant made in desperation in Jesus' name, and I mean write it out. Do not just think it. Do not just feel it. When you participate in public declaration, when you put it in writing, something shifts in the spirit realm. I have seen it happen hundreds of times when believers participate together, so participate now. Take 10 seconds. Write it out. All right. Let me tell you about the third pattern. The third pattern is isolation. Once a target was engaged, once they accepted the offer and walked through the door, the next step was always the same. Always, without exception. Cut them off from everyone who could protect them. This is critical. This is where the real damage begins. This is where captivity becomes complete. In my work against Christians, isolation was absolutely essential. I learned this early in my training. A Christian surrounded by praying family is hard to destroy. The prayers create a hedge of protection. A Christian connected to a strong church is protected. The community provides covering and accountability. A Christian with godly friends who speak truth into their life has multiple lines of defense. But get them alone. Get them away from their covering. Get them separated from everyone who could recognize what is happening and intervene. They become vulnerable. They become exposed. They become easy. I remember targeting a woman named Christine in my 10th year. She was married to a pastor, deeply connected to her church, had family nearby. By every measure, she should have been protected. But I noticed something. Her sister had moved away 2 years earlier. Her parents had passed. Her closest friends from college were in other states. The only community she had was the church. And churches, for all their good intentions, can be busy places where people fall through the cracks. I sent an assignment to create distance between Christine and her church family. Small offenses, misunderstandings, nothing dramatic. Just enough friction to make her pull back. Within 6 months she was attending services, but not really connected. She had acquaintances, but no real friends. Then I sent the real attack. A health crisis that made her miss church for weeks. Financial pressure that made her ashamed to face people. Marital tension that made her withdraw. By the time I was done, she was completely isolated, sitting alone in her house while her husband worked, no one calling to check on her. No one praying specifically for her, no one noticing that she was drowning. That is when the real damage happened. What I see in these elite networks is isolation taken to an extreme level. Survivors describe being separated from their families, physically removed from everyone who knew them. Some were taken to private islands, literally surrounded by ocean. No way to leave, no way to call for help, no way to escape. Others were moved into apartments controlled by the network, given everything they needed so they would not have to leave, given money which created dependence, given opportunities which created obligation, surrounded by people who were part of the operation, so even their new friendships were controlled. The survivors described feeling like they could not tell anyone, not just because they were afraid, not just because they were threatened, but because who would believe them? Think about it. You are a young woman from nowhere, no money, no connections, no power, and you are claiming that a billionaire with connections to presidents and princes is harming you. Who is going to believe that? Who is going to take your word over his? Who is going to choose you over someone who can destroy their career with a phone call? That sense of powerlessness, that feeling that no one will believe you, that certainty that speaking up will only make things worse. That is not just psychological. That is spiritual bondage. The enemy creates that feeling because it keeps you trapped. Another survivor described how she was explicitly threatened. They showed her a photograph of her younger brother at his school. They told her they knew his schedule. They told her they knew where he lived. They told her that if she ever told anyone what was happening, they would hurt him. Can you imagine carrying that? Can you imagine being harmed and then being told that if you speak up, they will harm the person you love most in the world? That is how the darkness operates. Fear, isolation, the systematic removal of every support system, every potential ally, every possible source of help. The goal is to make you feel completely alone, to make you feel like there is no point in fighting, to make you feel like resistance is futile and escape is impossible. If you have ever felt completely alone in your suffering, I need you to understand something right now. The enemy works hard to create that feeling. He invests significant resources into isolating you, because your isolation is his advantage. Your loneliness is his tool. Your separation from community is his strategy. But you are never truly alone. God sees. God knows. God is present even in the darkest pit, even in the most isolated island, even in the apartment where no one else knows what is happening. And God is able to reach into that darkness and pull you out. He has done it before. He is doing it right now, and he will do it again. The fact that these survivors are speaking now, decades later, telling their stories, standing in courtrooms and before Congress, That is proof that isolation does not have the final word. Light can penetrate any darkness. Truth can break through any wall of silence. Hold on to that if you are in a place of isolation right now. It is not permanent. It is not forever. God sees you, and He is making a way out even now. The fourth pattern is normalization. This is perhaps the most insidious part of the whole operation. Once a target was isolated, once they were cut off from everyone who could protect them, the next step was to make the abnormal feel normal. I used this principle constantly in my work against Christians. I would send thoughts to our targets that seemed like their own thoughts, not dramatic voices from the sky. Subtle suggestions that sounded like their own internal dialogue. Maybe this is not so bad. Maybe I am overreacting. Maybe everyone struggles with this. Maybe I am the one who has been wrong all along. I would create circumstances that made compromise feel reasonable. Put them in situations where the wrong choice seemed like the only logical choice, where sin seemed like survival, where compromise seemed like wisdom. And I would surround them with people who validated their choices, people who told them what they wanted to hear, people who made them feel like their gradual slide into darkness was actually enlightenment. Over time, the Christian would start to believe it. Maybe this relationship is not really wrong. Maybe this business practice is just how things work. Maybe my old convictions were too extreme. Maybe I was the one who needed to grow up. That is how deception works. It does not usually hit you all at once. It seeps in slowly, gradually, until you look back one day and cannot believe how far you have drifted from where you started. What I see in these elite networks is normalization on a horrifying scale. Survivors describe how the exploitation was presented as something glamorous, something elite, something special that only chosen people got to experience. They were given expensive gifts, watches, jewelry, clothes, things they could never have afforded, things that made them feel special, things that created a sense of obligation and indebtedness. They were flown on private jets. Imagine, you grew up taking the bus. You have never been on an airplane in your life, and suddenly you are on a private jet, being served drinks by flight attendants, flying to places you have only seen in magazines. They were introduced to famous people, celebrities, politicians, royalty, people whose names they had only heard on television, and these famous people treated them like they belonged, like they were part of this world now. The message was clear, even if it was never spoken directly. This is how the powerful live. This is how the world really works. This is the reality behind the curtain. And now you are part of it. Now you are special. Now you belong. One survivor said she started to believe she had chosen this, that she was a willing participant, that what was happening was somehow her decision. It took years of therapy for her to understand the truth. She was not a willing participant. She had been targeted. She had been groomed, manipulated, psychologically broken down over months and years until abnormal felt normal, until exploitation felt like opportunity, until harm felt like love. The enemy always does this. He takes what is evil and wraps it in the appearance of something desirable. He makes sin look like success. He makes compromise look like sophistication. He makes destruction look like destiny. I fell for it myself. For 17 years, I believed I was part of something powerful, something meaningful, something that gave me identity and purpose. I thought I was special because I had been chosen. I thought I was important because I had access to knowledge that others did not have. It was all a lie. I was just a tool, a weapon being wielded against God's people, and the sense of belonging and purpose I felt, that was manufactured. That was manipulation. That was normalization, making the abnormal feel like home. If you have ever found yourself in a situation where you look back and think, how did I ever believe that was okay? I need you to understand something important. That was not your failure. That was not your weakness. That was manipulation. That was the enemy using every tool at his disposal to blind you to the truth, to make wrong feel right, to make darkness feel like light. And the fact that you can see it now, the fact that you look back and recognize how far you drifted, that is not something to be ashamed of. That is grace. That is God opening your eyes. That is the light breaking through the darkness. You are not stupid because you were deceived. The enemy is good at deception. It is literally what he does. The only people who are never deceived are the people who stay so close to the truth that they can recognize counterfeits immediately. Participate with me right now. In the comments, declare this: my eyes are open and I reject every lie I believed. Take 10 seconds. Write it out. Something shifts in the spiritual realm when you declare truth. Something breaks when you speak your freedom out loud. Do it now. The fifth pattern is consumption. I'm going to be very careful here because I do not want to describe things that would harm anyone or violate the dignity of survivors. But I need to explain what I mean by soul harvesting. When I was active, my handler Dale told me something during my 7th year that I never forgot. We were sitting in his truck after a meeting. It was late, maybe 2 in the morning. I'd been asking questions about the higher operations, the ones I was not supposed to know about. He was usually careful not to say too much. But that night, maybe because he was tired, maybe because he trusted me more than he should have, he opened up a little. He said, "Carson, what you do is valuable. You disrupt. You destroy faith. You remove covering. But the highest operations are different. They do not just destroy, they harvest." I asked him what that meant. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Innocence is not just a concept. It is a spiritual substance. And when it is taken, when it is corrupted, something transfers. Something is collected." I did not fully understand at the time, but after I came to Christ, after I started studying Scripture and learning about spiritual warfare from the right side, I began to understand what he meant. In the spirit realm, trauma creates a wound, a real spiritual wound. That wound can become an entry point for demonic attachment. The greater the trauma, especially trauma inflicted intentionally and repeatedly, the deeper the wound. When trauma is inflicted on the young, on the innocent, on those whose souls have not yet been hardened by the world, something is damaged at a fundamental level. Psychologists call it different things. They talk about the effects on brain development. They talk about attachment disorders. They talk about dissociation. But from a spiritual perspective, what happens is fragmentation. The soul itself can be fractured, split, broken into pieces as a survival mechanism. Survivors of severe harm often describe exactly this. They describe feeling like they left their body during the harm, like they floated away, like they went somewhere else while the evil was happening. They describe losing time, hours or days that they cannot account for. They describe feeling like part of them never came back. Psychology calls this dissociation, and it is a documented phenomenon. It is the mind's way of protecting itself from trauma that is too overwhelming to process. But from a spiritual perspective, that fragmentation is exactly what the enemy wants. Because a fragmented soul is a soul that can be partially claimed, partially occupied, partially consumed. The survivors of these elite networks describe exactly this experience, leaving their bodies, going somewhere else, feeling like they were watching what was happening from outside themselves, and afterward, feeling like something was missing, like part of them was gone and they could not get it back. Many of them have struggled for decades with the aftermath. Addiction, depression, anxiety, eating disorders, relationship difficulties. A persistent sense that something is fundamentally broken inside them that they cannot fix. That is not weakness. That is the wound that was inflicted on them. And it requires more than therapy to heal. It requires supernatural intervention. It requires the God who made them to restore what was stolen. But here is what the enemy does not want you to know. Here is the truth that hell tries desperately to hide from survivors. What is fragmented can be restored. What was consumed can be reclaimed. What the enemy took can be returned. The Bible says that Jesus came to bind up the brokenhearted. That word in Hebrew, brokenhearted, it literally means shattered, fragmented, broken into pieces. Jesus came specifically for the fragmented ones, for the ones whose souls were shattered by trauma, for the ones who feel like part of them is missing and can never be found. And he is able to do what no therapy, no medication, no human effort can accomplish. He is able to gather the fragments, to restore the pieces, to make whole what was broken. I have seen it happen. I have watched survivors who should have been destroyed, who by every measure should be broken beyond repair, walk in complete freedom, complete wholeness, complete restoration. And that brings me to the most important part of what I want to share today. The part that terrified me when I was in the darkness, and the part that gives me hope now that I walk in the light. Why are some survivors impossible to destroy? This is the question that haunted me when I was still in the darkness. And it is the question I finally understood after I surrendered my life to Jesus. When I was active, I would occasionally encounter someone who should have been an easy target. All the markers were there: wounded, isolated, desperate, previous trauma that should have created open doors, no obvious spiritual covering, no strong church community. Everything indicated they would fall quickly. But when we sent assignments against them, nothing worked. I remember one woman specifically. I will call her Sarah. She lived in a small town about 2 hours from where I was based. Single mother, 3 kids, working 2 jobs just to survive. She had been through things that should have destroyed her completely. Harm in childhood from a family member. Harm in her first marriage from a husband who was supposed to protect her. Financial devastation when that husband left. Health problems that drained what little savings she had. Everything the darkness could throw at a person, she had endured. My handler assigned her to me in my 9th year. He said she was connected to a church that was causing problems for some of our operations in that region. He wanted her neutralized, broken, removed from influence. I studied her for weeks. I identified her vulnerabilities. I created a detailed plan of attack. Financial pressure first, then health, then isolation from her church community. Standard progression. We sent the assignments, and we waited. Nothing happened. I increased the intensity. Sent more focused attacks. Targeted her children, hoping that seeing them struggle would break her. Targeted her workplace, trying to get her fired. Targeted her sleep, sending spirits of anxiety and fear. Months went by. She kept standing. She lost a job, got a better one within 2 weeks. Her car broke down. Someone from her church bought her a new one. Her health declined. She went to a healing service and came back stronger. Everything we threw at her bounced off like we were throwing rocks at a tank. I reported back to my handler frustrated. I told him, "This one is broken. She should have fallen by now. There is something wrong with our intelligence." Dale looked at me with this strange expression. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Some of them carry a mark we cannot touch. Leave her alone. You are wasting resources." I asked him what he meant. What kind of mark? How did she get it? How could we remove it? He just shook his head. "You cannot remove it. It is not from us, so we have no authority over it. Move on to someone else." I did not understand what he meant. Not until 13 years ago, when I surrendered my life to Christ and started learning about spiritual warfare from the other side. Now I understand. Some people carry supernatural protection. Not because they are perfect. Not because they have done everything right. Not because they deserve it more than others. But because God's hand is on them. Because there is a calling on their life that the enemy cannot stop. Because heaven has marked them as untouchable. Sarah was one of those people. Despite everything she had been through, despite all the trauma and wounds and pain, she carried something we could not overcome. A covering we could not penetrate. A mark we could not remove. When I look at survivors of networks like what Epstein operated, I see this same phenomenon. Some of them were destroyed by what happened. Some of them are still struggling decades later. Some of them, like Virginia Giuffre, fought for years and then lost the battle. But some of them, they are standing, they are speaking, they are testifying before Congress, they are writing books, they are appearing on television. They are demanding justice not just for themselves but for others. And the enemy cannot figure out why they will not break. I will tell you why. Divine covering, divine purpose, divine protection that no amount of darkness can overcome. There is a protection that comes from God Himself. It is not something you earn. You cannot be good enough to deserve it. It is not something you achieve. You cannot work hard enough to attain it. It is something you receive, a gift, a mark, a covering that comes from heaven. And when that covering is on your life, the enemy can throw everything he has at you, and you will still be standing. I read about one survivor who fought for over 20 years to bring these predators to justice. She faced threats. She faced lawsuits. She faced powerful men with unlimited resources trying to silence her. She faced disbelief from people who should have protected her. She faced her own trauma every single day, and she kept going. From a natural perspective, she should have given up. The odds were impossible. The opposition was overwhelming. Every logical calculation said she could not win. She should have collapsed under the weight of what was done to her and what was done to silence her. But she did not, because there was a mark on her life that the darkness could not erase. There was a calling that hell could not stop. There was a purpose that no predator could steal. If you are a survivor of any kind of harm, I need you to hear me right now. Really hear me. The enemy wanted to destroy you. He sent his best against you. He used every tool at his disposal. He targeted your mind, your emotions, your body, your relationships, your future, and he failed. The fact that you are still breathing right now is proof of divine protection. The fact that you are still fighting, still believing, still hoping, that is proof that there is a calling on your life that hell could not stop. You are not still here by accident. You are not still standing by chance. You survived because God is not finished with you, because there is purpose in your pain, because your story is not over. If that is you, I want you to participate with me right now. Write this in the comments. I survived because God is not finished with me. Write it out, declare it, own it. Let it sink into your spirit. You are not just a survivor. You are proof that darkness does not have the final word. You are evidence that God protects his own. You are a testimony that the enemy cannot explain away. Now let me tell you about the sixth pattern. And this one is actually good news. This one gives me hope every single day. The sixth pattern is exposure. The enemy loves darkness. He operates in secret. He thrives when no one is watching, when no one is asking questions, when no one is shining light into the places he wants to keep hidden. What I see happening right now with these files, with these revelations, with survivors finally being heard, after decades of silence, it is the opposite of what the darkness wants. It is the nightmare scenario for every operation like this. Light is being shined into places that were hidden for years, for decades. Some of these secrets have been kept for 30 years or more. Some of the survivors waited most of their adult lives for anyone to believe them. And now finally the world is listening. When I was active, our greatest fear was exposure. We operated in absolute secrecy. We depended on people not believing survivors, on people dismissing testimony as fantasy or attention-seeking, on people thinking the truth was too crazy, too dark, too unbelievable to be real. As long as the secret stayed secret, we had power. As long as survivors felt too ashamed or too afraid or too hopeless to speak, the operations continued. As long as powerful people protected other powerful people, nothing changed. But when the light comes, when truth is spoken publicly, when documents are released and testimonies are heard and secrets are dragged into the open, the darkness loses its grip. That is why survivors speaking out is so critically important. Not just for legal justice, though that matters. Not just for accountability, though that matters too, but because every word of truth they speak shatters another piece of the wall of silence that protected these predators. Every survivor who stands up and says, "This happened to me," weakens the darkness. Every document released exposes another hidden corner. Every person who refuses to look away removes another shadow where evil used to hide. The enemy is not afraid of what happens in darkness. He controls the darkness. He is comfortable there. What terrifies him is what happens when darkness is exposed to light, because light changes everything. I believe we are living in a time of unprecedented exposure, not just with this particular network, but across society. Hidden things are coming to light in the church, in government, in entertainment, in business, in families that kept secrets for generations. And as painful and uncomfortable as that exposure is, it is necessary. It is good, because what stays hidden stays powerful. But what is brought into the light can be confronted, can be addressed, can be healed. Let me tell you about my own encounter with the light. For 17 years I served the darkness. I thought I was powerful. I thought I had found meaning in a meaningless world. I thought I was part of something significant that gave my empty life purpose. But the whole time, underneath all of it, I was empty. There is a hollowness that comes from serving the enemy. You get what you think you want: power, recognition, purpose, a sense of belonging to something bigger than yourself. But you never get satisfaction, you never get peace, you never get rest. There is always another assignment, always another target, always more that is demanded of you. The hunger is never satisfied. The achievement is never enough. The emptiness never fills no matter what you pour into it. By year 15, I was exhausted, burned out, running on fumes and bitterness. I had sent assignments against hundreds of Christians. I had watched marriages collapse. I had watched businesses fail. I had watched faith crumble. I had seen people driven to the edge of giving up on everything. And I felt nothing, just emptiness. Just the growing realization that everything I had built my identity on was hollow. Then I got assigned to a woman named Beth. She was a school teacher, single, lived in a little house at the end of a quiet road. The assignment was simple. Isolate her, destroy her peace, make her so depressed and so lonely that she would give up on God entirely. I remember thinking this would be quick. Single woman, living alone, no husband to be a spiritual covering, easy target, or so I thought. I started the work, and at first it went like it always did. I identified the gaps, I placed the initial assignments, I waited for the results. But something was wrong. The assignment was not taking, nothing was working. Week after week I would check on the progress, and Beth was fine, more than fine. She was thriving. She was singing in her kitchen. She was laughing with her students at school. She was peaceful in a way that made no spiritual sense given what I was throwing at her. And when I looked closer, I saw it, on her nightstand, an open Bible, worn out, pages yellowed, spine cracked. That thing had been opened 1,000 times, and it was radiating. I tried everything. I tried coming at her from different angles. I tried amplifying loneliness. I tried financial stress. I tried health attacks. Nothing got through. That Bible was a fortress, and Beth was inside it. I should have moved on. Dale told me to move on. But something about Beth got under my skin. I was angry. Angry that this simple school teacher with her beat-up Bible was beating me. And I wanted to know why. So I started watching her more closely. Not to attack, just to watch. And what I saw changed everything. Every night Beth would come home from school. She would make dinner. She would clean up. And then she would sit on her bed, open her Bible, and talk to God like he was sitting right next to her. Not fancy prayers, not theological speeches. She would say things like, "Lord, I had a hard day today. One of my students is struggling and I do not know how to help. Can you show me?" And then she would read, sometimes a chapter, sometimes just a few verses, and then she would leave the Bible open and go to sleep. And here is what destroyed me. One night I watched her pray, and she said something that broke something inside me. She said, "Lord, I know there is someone out there hurting right now, someone trapped in darkness. Would you reach them? Would you show them your love? I do not know who they are, but you do. Save them, Lord." She was praying for me. She did not know it. She had no idea. But she was praying for the very person trying to destroy her. And something about that prayer, something about the sincerity of it, the purity of it, the love behind it, it cut through me like nothing I had ever felt. I went back to my apartment that night, and I could not sleep. I could not eat. I could not function. That woman's prayer was echoing inside me, and for the first time in 17 years I felt something I thought was dead. My conscience. 3 days later, I was sitting in my car outside a gas station and I could not stop shaking. I was having a breakdown. Everything I had done, every family I had destroyed, every life I had ruined, it was all crashing down on me at once, and I was drowning in it. I do not know why I did what I did next. I walked into the gas station, and on one of those spinning racks by the counter, there was a little pocket Bible, one of those cheap ones, maybe $2. I bought it. I sat in my car, and I opened it. I opened it to Psalm 34, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." And I broke. Right there in that gas station parking lot, I started sobbing, and I prayed the ugliest, most desperate prayer anyone has ever prayed. I said, "God, if you are real, if you still want me after everything I have done, I need you right now, because I cannot do this anymore." And he showed up. I cannot explain it in words that do justice to what happened. But there in that car with that $2 Bible open in my lap, something broke in the atmosphere. I felt warmth, real warmth, not physical warmth, but something deeper. Something that went down into the places in me that had been cold and dead for 17 years. And the chains broke. The darkness lifted. The assignments that had been placed on me, because yes, the organization places assignments on its own members to keep them loyal, those assignments shattered. I could physically feel things leaving me. Heaviness I had carried so long I forgot it was there. Voices I had heard for so long I thought they were my own thoughts. All of it. Gone. I sat in that parking lot for 3 hours, crying, talking to God, reading that little pocket Bible with shaking hands. And when I finally drove home, I knew 2 things. First, my life in the organization was over. And second, the open Bible, the weapon I had feared for 17 years, had just saved my life. So I left the organization that week. It was not easy. They do not let people walk away. There were threats, there were incidents, but God made a way. He put people around me, Christians who had no idea about my past, but who knew how to pray. And their prayers, combined with the word of God that I was now devouring daily, created a wall around me that the organization could not penetrate. The emptiness that haunted me for 17 years. Gone. The hollowness at my core, filled. The purposelessness, replaced with something I had never experienced. Peace. Real peace. The same peace I had seen in Beth's eyes. That was 13 years ago. And I have spent every year since then doing what I am doing right now. Warning believers about what they are really fighting. Exposing the enemy's tactics. Helping people understand that the darkness is real, but the one who fights for us is greater. So let me bring this all together. What I see when I look at networks like what Epstein operated is not just crime. It is not just evil men doing evil things for evil purposes. It is not just exploitation for profit or power. It is a coordinated spiritual operation designed to harvest the most vulnerable souls on earth. The patterns are clear to anyone who knows what to look for. And now you know what to look for. Targeting the wounded. Finding those who are already broken, already isolated, already without spiritual covering. Looking for the open doors created by previous trauma and generational damage. Recruiting through need. Offering to fill the empty places with money, opportunity, belonging, acceptance. Making captivity look like rescue. Making exploitation look like opportunity. Isolating from protection. Cutting off everyone who might intervene, might recognize what is happening, might rescue them. Creating total dependence and total control. Normalizing the abnormal. Making exploitation feel like privilege. Making harm feel like love. Making darkness feel like light. Rewiring the soul to accept what should never be accepted. Consuming innocence. Taking what is pure and corrupting it. Fragmenting it. Claiming it for the kingdom of darkness. But I also see something else. Something the enemy does not want you to focus on. Something that terrified me when I was in the darkness and gives me hope now that I walk in the light. I see survivors who should have been destroyed, but were not. People who walked through the worst darkness imaginable and came out still standing, still fighting, still speaking truth. I see truth being told after decades of silence, survivors finding their voices, documents being released, light penetrating places that were hidden for generations. I see the patterns of the enemy being revealed for the whole world to see, his tactics exposed, his methods documented, his operations dismantled one by one. The secrets he depended on are becoming public knowledge, and that exposure is changing everything. More survivors are finding courage to speak. More people are asking questions that were once forbidden. More light is reaching places that were dark for decades. And I see the same God who pulled me out of 17 years of darkness, reaching into the deepest pits and rescuing his children. The same God who used Beth's prayer to reach me when I was lost is sending people right now to find others who are still trapped in darkness. He never stops pursuing. He never gives up on anyone. If you are a survivor of any kind of harm, if you have walked through things that should have destroyed you completely, hear me now. God sees you. God knows exactly what was done to you, and God is able to restore what the enemy tried to steal. You are not too broken. You are not too damaged. You are not too far gone. You are not beyond redemption or healing or restoration, no matter what you have been through. If you are breathing right now, God is not finished with you. There is purpose in your survival. There is meaning in your pain. There is a future the enemy tried to steal but failed to take from you. And that future starts today, right now, in this moment. The enemy wanted your story to end in destruction, but God is writing a different ending. An ending where you walk in freedom. An ending where your pain becomes purpose. An ending where your testimony helps set others free. If you want the complete protocol for breaking every assignment over your life, grab Destroying Assignments. The link is in the description. It will walk you through 14 days of targeted deliverance, financial attacks, health attacks, relationship attacks, destiny attacks. Every assignment exposed and destroyed. My name is Carson. I grew up in a small town, farming country, about 6,000 people. I spent 17 years serving darkness. I targeted over 300 Christians. I thought I had power. I thought I had found meaning. I had nothing, just emptiness pretending to be purpose. But God, He used a schoolteacher named Beth who would not break no matter what I threw at her. He used her prayer for someone she did not even know, and He gave me a new assignment, a new purpose, not to destroy lives, but to set captives free. If you believe God can do the same for you, participate one final time. Write this in the comments. I receive my freedom today. Write it out. Declare it. Mean it. Something shifts in the spiritual realm when you put your faith into words. Something breaks when you speak your freedom out loud. Let me pray for you. Father, I lift up everyone watching this right now. Every survivor, every wounded soul, everyone who has walked through darkness and wondered if they would ever see light again. I break every assignment sent against them. I bind every spirit of shame in Jesus' name and command it to leave now. Every spirit of fear, I bind you and cast you out. Every lie that says they are too damaged, too broken, too far gone to be healed, I cancel by the blood of Jesus. Father, restore what was stolen. Heal what was wounded. Reclaim what the enemy tried to consume. Gather every fragment that was scattered. Make whole what was broken into pieces. Let every person watching know deep in their spirit that they are not their past. They are not their trauma. They are not what was done to them. They are yours, and no weapon formed against them will prosper. Not now. Not ever. Not as long as they walk under your covering and in your purpose. I declare freedom over their finances, freedom over their health, freedom over their relationships, freedom over their minds, freedom over their destiny. What the enemy meant for destruction, you will use for your glory. What was meant to break them will become their testimony. What was meant to silence them will become their voice. In Jesus' name, amen. From the pit to the cross. See you in the next one.